So the first optimization we're going to cover for Laravel is one you actually run quite often, probably without realizing it, and that is the artisan optimize command. So I'm just going to run this with the -h flag and we'll see what it does. And the help option here says it optimizes the framework for better performance. So that seems like a no-brainer. That's obviously something we want. Let's actually see what this does. But before we dive into that, I'm going to show you while you're running this all the time without necessarily knowing it. So I'm going to head to PHP Storm and we'll check out the Composer JSON file. And what we're going to see here are the script section of the Composer JSON file, and it tells your server or local dev environment to run a few commands after certain actions. So when you first install a new instance of Laravel, it's actually going to create a new M file, and it's going to run php artisan key generate. But more interestingly, after we run composer update or composer install, it's going to run these two commands. It'll either be composer scripts post install or composer scripts post update, and then it runs php artisan optimize. So let's go over and just see what these things do real quick. I'm just going to find composer scripts, and we'll see what this does is actually pretty simple. It's going to either run post install or post update, depending on if you're running composer update or composer install. And all that does is includes or requires the vendor autoload file, so it can autoload classes, and then it's going to run the cleared compile function that is also within the same class. So if we head on down to clear compiled, we'll see here it's just creating a new instance of the Laravel application, and then it's getting the cached services path and it's unlinking that, which means it's deleting it. So if I command click on get cache services path, PHP Storm will jump to that, and we're going to see that it's just going to get the bootstrap path, cache directory, services PHP. So if I go back here, we can check out the bootstrap directory, the cache directory, the services PHP file, it's just deleting this. So composer.json, it's going to call composer scripts post install or post update. That is going to call clear compiled, and that's going to delete the compiled services file. And the compiled services file is just what it says. It's a file that has a list of your service providers, and it's compiled already. In other words, Laravel's already done the calculations of which providers to load and when to load these providers. And this is actually a little bit of a complicated calculation, so it's really good to get these cached. We have a list of providers. We have a list of which ones to eager load. We have a list of which ones are deferred. Now, if you're not familiar with deferred, that just means the provider is not going to load until it's called in your code somewhere. So things like the broadcast manager or your cache classes, migrate classes, all that stuff, they're not loaded on every page request in your application. They're only loaded if they are called upon somewhere in the application. And then finally, in the bottom here, we have ones that are set when. In other words, what service providers are set to load when a certain event in Laravel is called. These are all features of service providers that you can use yourself. But in any case, the compiled services file has done all that pre-calculation to know when service providers are loaded and what they depend on and all that good stuff. And we want that cached because that is a relatively expensive operation. So composer.json, when we run composer install or composer update, is going to delete that file and then run php artisan optimize. Now this is actually a very familiar command, but I'll show you what it does, and that's basically two things. We'll just find the optimize command in PHP Storm, and we'll see that it's going to do two things like I said. The first is it's going to run dump autoload, and then it's going to run clear compiled. Now, clear compiled is actually exactly what we just saw. So composer scripts has this function clear compiled, and it deletes the bootstrap cache services.php file. The clear compiled command that it calls at the end here does the exact same thing. So if I find clear compiled PHP, you can see it's actually doing the exact same code. Get the cache services path and delete that file. Now, the services file is actually going to get recreated on your next request. So that's when it gets recreated and added to this location. There's no command to recreate it yourself. The other thing this does is that it runs dump autoload, and it actually defaults to dump autoload with the optimized flag. So it's going to run dump autoload. It's going to add the optimized flag. And that means it's basically just going to run composer dump autoload with the optimized flag. And let's see, I can do composer dump autoload -h. We're going to see the optimized flag, or -o, optimizes PSR0 or 4 packages to be loaded with class maps 2, good for production. And what this means is that it's going to create class maps for all of the classes it can find loaded under PSR0 or PSR4, which speeds up the loading of those classes a lot in production. So the first performance win we're going to see in this mini course for scaling Laravel is the php artisan optimize command. And what we can see is that that gets run automatically when we run composer update or composer install, but it's also good to add after a deployment to production because it's going to delete the services file and have Laravel recreate it. So it'll have the latest compiled version of all the services that are loaded in Laravel. And then it's going to run composer dump autoload, and that will update the autoload file, which in turn loads a few other files. If we go to the composer directory, we'll see the class map file here, whereas all the class mapped classes is actually quite large because it has class mapped all of the PSR0 or PSR4 classes. And this will be a much quicker way to load them than having it recalculate the file path based on the class name every single time you call for it. So that's quick and easy, and it's really done automatically for you in many cases, but it's also good to add just in case into your production deployment scripts, just to make sure you are getting the latest services cached and that you're running dump autoload with the optimized flag, which will make loading of classes much faster.